We're excited to have the group of folks here today to talk about wildfire turning loss into strategy. Talk about some of the things that have gone on in the state of Wyoming in the last couple of years. We're here to share those lessons learned. We may not have formal recovery programs with dedicated funds, but we do have partnerships and eagerness to help our communities. I think it's also worth noting that response to wildfire, and especially within the wildland-urban interface, or WUI, is different than responding to any other type of disaster. With these types of events becoming more prevalent across the nation, we wanted to share our experiences. In Wyoming, the Division of Forestry, led by our state forester, Kelly Norris, is the dedicated response agency for not only wildland fire, but forest management as well. 2024 was a banner year for Wyoming as far as fire is concerned. Kelly was a busy lady. She will share more of the story and some of the challenges she faced as we have our conversation. Bob Budd, the director of the Wyoming Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust. The trust was created by the legislature in 2005. It is funded by the interest earned on a permanent account, donations, and legislative appropriations. The purpose of the program is to enhance and conserve wildlife habitat and natural resource values throughout the state. The WWNRT works on landscape scale projects and which include fuels reduction for reducing the vulnerability of wildfire. One other area that's greatly affected by wildfire is power generation. The power companies in Wyoming work in conjunction with firefighters and emergency managers at the local and state level to make plans for prevention of wildfire as well as swift recovery when affected by it. So we have asked Dustin McKinn, the Director of Asset Management Services with Black Hills Energy, to share his perspective today as well. I would encourage you to dive into the forum app to see their impressive backgrounds under the speaker bios. Let's first start with incident response. Kelly, please share with us what response looks like as a state forester.
All right, well, thank you, Lynn. I first want to just start off by saying thank you for the invitation for being here. We're really lucky to have Lynn here in Wyoming with Homeland Security, and we can't thank her enough. So thank you for that, and thank you for all coming to Wyoming. We really appreciate you all here and visiting Cheyenne. So when it comes to incident response in Wyoming, we have a really deep belief of all hands, all lands. We tend to, when we have a fire start, we recognize that where it starts, there's a jurisdictional responsibility associated with where it starts. But when that call goes out, we don't question where that fire is, we go. It's well known that our single engine air tanker bases across Wyoming are one of the quickest in response because we don't question. When the call comes in and is get ordered, it's going. And if it's a fire on private land, on state, federal, we're moving as quickly as we can to help all of us respond. And with that means that there is a significant amount of interagency work that is done during the suppression time. We're all coordinating, we're all taking each of our resources as quickly as possible and putting the pieces together, whether it's heavy equipment, aviation, engines, the whole kit and caboodle coming in to put out a fire as quickly as possible. Or it's in the background, we have trainings where we train together, we plan together. We're coming together and putting agreements in place of how we're going to do what we need to do in the time of an emergency. So that's a year-round thing that we do together between local resources, so our county fire districts, or with the state, as well as with both the BLM and the U.S. Forest Service here in Wyoming. And if you were to take a look at Wyoming and you take a look at the ownership makeup of Wyoming, it is very likely when we have a wildfire, we are dealing with multiple jurisdictions. We're dealing with fires that are going to come off a private onto state, or come off a state onto the BLM, or come off the forest on into our communities. And that is something that we really experienced, as Lynn was talking about, in 2024. We were still dealing with two very, very large wildfires last year at this time. The Elk Fire, we had Sheridan completely evacuated. Basically, the fire was almost all the way down half the face of the Bighorns. And we also had quite a few communities evacuated in Fremont County because of the Pack Trail Fire. So that is something that was new to us. here in Wyoming was just the impact of when fires start moving into your communities and how quickly we need to not just interact and integrate with ourselves as fire response, but then bringing in Homeland, bringing in the evacuation setup with the sheriff's office and Red Cross. And there's just so much more to think about when we start having fires in our communities. And one of the things that we really want to touch on too here was what we would call an FMEG fire. I'm sure many of your states have received some of those, especially Western states. So that is something that state forestry is responsible for, is putting in the application for the FMEG fire. Last year, we had 4 FMEG fires. The first one actually was just right outside of town here called the Happy Jack Fire. That was March 1st. We had then an FMEG fire just up a ways here near Wheatland. And the last FMEG fire was the fire that was going last year, the elk fire. So with that, we go through a whole process of what that's going to need to look like. We notify, we do the application, but we really coordinate with Homeland Security because on the back end, there is additional grants that are given through Homeland, and they take care of that side of the recovery. So we're going to kind of coordinate with all our interagency groups as we work into these fires and beyond these fires. So outside of that, I think the other part of fire to be aware of is the fact that there's quite a bit when it comes to costs and cost shares. And so with that, we work pretty closely, again, with our agreements. And I'm dealing with the fire suppression side and the cost of those fires, but we're going to have Bob talk about all the things that it costs to do when it comes to recovery, specifically on private and state lands, which was what was impacted this last year.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Kelly. Busy year, for sure. Hopefully, we've had some conversations earlier in our sessions about the mitigation funding that has traditionally gone with those FMEG fires. You'll see how important that is and why we know all of us are hoping that those are going to happen again because they haven't this year yet. So even though we have one FMEG. So Dustin, can you provide insight into the decisions of Black Hills Energy as our partners, and especially with the public safety power shutoff communications and alerts?
Yeah, thanks. Kelly captured all of that really, really well. And I want to start by saying thank you for the opportunity to be here with you all. Thank you for the tremendous work that you all do. Often goes unnoticed. Really, we lean on you a lot. So thanks for your efforts. Thanks especially to Lynn. For all of the work that you do and for the partnership that you bring. We've got great relationships as a utility company. So we do natural gas and electric distribution, transmission, generation, those kinds of things. We've got great relationships with our Homeland Security groups, especially with our local county emergency managers. They're the boots on the ground with us as we're working through several initiatives. But Kelly mentioned the Happy Jack fire in that case. We have boots on the ground with our local EMs and all of the different agencies that have to respond to those kinds of things. And I know that our role in some of that is relatively minor, but what we like to do is have someone in the incident command center when we can. We had our PIO plugged in that case in the incident command operation so that we could make sure that our efforts were closely aligned with the efforts of the response teams. And we really take the lead from you all in those cases in terms of where do we need to respond? Where do we need to de-energize portions of the system? What portions of our system are critical to keep on, like portions that are feeding water supplies and things like that. So it's really just critical that the relationships that we're building in these kinds of events carry into active incidents. So again, partnerships with all of the different agencies, partnerships with our county emergency managers, and then coordination when it comes down to crunch time. Kelly mentioned kind of the off-season planning. I don't know that there is an off-season for wildfire anymore, unfortunately. But when we're not in active fires, we're planning. I'll be down in southern Colorado in a few weeks with our county emergency managers tabletopping various drills. One of those drills will be our public safety power shutoff, which is a new tool that we've added to our tool belt this summer to try and be a part of risk mitigation strategies. In that case, we've got capabilities or tools that we've never had before as a utility company. This summer, we went out and stood up our own fleet of weather stations so that we can be more in tune with local weather on a more granular basis. We've also taken now, we know that there's a lot of interest in that data. So we've now are funneling that data out into public resources so that you all can have access to that information as we're seeing it. But our PSPS program took us a while to get our heads around as we think about actively or proactively shutting off power to folks. That's somewhat controversial or has been for us. Our DNA is keeping utilities on. And often, like in a fire case, we got our folks are kind of kicking down doors, trying to get out there to get lines stood back up so that we can get our customers back with energy. But there's a time and a place for that, and we're rethinking about some of those things a little bit differently. But we know that communication is going to be critical to this. So as we're monitoring weather conditions, we see conditions that concern us that may trigger a PSPS. Our first calls typically are to our emergency managers and our Homeland Security partners, those kinds of folks, because we know that there's going to be other things that need to trigger in that event or possibly need to trigger. And so we don't want to surprise you by you hearing it from someone else. So once we do that, we'll trigger more broad communications as much as we can out into our customers. So we built some additional capabilities to automatically notify affected individuals through text messages, emails, phone calls, those kinds of things, to share information as quickly as we can, understanding that all of that is built off of weather forecast. And weather forecasting, I think, in any part of the world, but especially this part of the world, can be tricky. So we're working hard on active fire response as well as fire prevention.
Thanks so much. We appreciate all the hard work you guys are doing and getting those plans put together. Communication is exceptional. Partnerships, like you said. Thank you. So what the 2024 season really did was pull together partners, maybe in a new way. The governor brought all of the appropriate state agencies together and asked us to evaluate what funding each agency had. And the biggest need identified was for recovery funding for both landowners, but the landscape as well. Bob, can you talk about the process with the legislature for looking at recovery funding for the fire season and how it dovetailed into current projects within your agency?
I will, but first, by way of introduction, you're a lot more docile than you were last night, which I think is probably good. I have a little different perspective, and it's with no disrespect for others, but things like using the term mitigation is a completely different meaning to the world I work in than it is the one Lynn works in. And so we have to sort through sometimes terminology to understand we're all trying to get to the same place, but what Lynn calls mitigation dollars, that's not even remotely close to what we would call mitigation dollars. Most of the problems, and I think this by background, the problems that we're facing today, we need to start admitting that we created those problems, primarily with our own hubris and our own cocksuredness that we could handle and control nature. The kind of things that I deal with are river channelization, loss of wetlands, invasive species that come in, conifer encroachment, healthy forests and rangelands. Those are all things that create resilience and prevent disasters, and we are way behind in keeping up with that. The overlap between disciplines doesn't just exist in fire. Aquatic invasive species is a good example of that, where game and fish is really the front line. But if we end up with aquatic invasives, Homeland Security suddenly has a massive role because of the impact that it can have on local communities, on their water systems and things like that. Another one is we did a project on the Platte River in Saratoga, which could not get off the ground until Homeland Security stepped in and dealt with it as a mitigation project. And then we were able to come in and fund the river piece of that as an ecological project. So it was a beautiful merge of all of the things that were there. And there were multiple partners that couldn't get it off the ground until we brought Homeland in and they said, hey, this piece we can take, and if you'll pick up the other piece. And we did. And that relates primarily to funding. So as far as fire goes, the big threat that we had as a result of these fires, what did we do, Kelly? 1 million acres almost, didn't we?
800, it was 856,000 acres about, right in there.
And it was unique in the aspect that most of our fires historically have been in woodlands, forest systems. You get ecologically, historically on rangelands, grasslands, fires were small, they burned themselves out, they'd get rained on, you could put them out. These were massive fires that were in grasslands. And one of the reasons that they carried so well is that we had had invasive species like cheatgrass, medusa head, ventnata, and we had conifer encroachment, things like juniper, which carried those fires so fast and so far that there was no way that you could get ahead of them. So after it was all said and done, we went to the legislature and said, look, we're going to need a massive infusion of capital to prevent this from happening again and to recover these landscapes. So we've allocated $46.5 million in the last 6 months, 8 months to treat cheatgrass, medusa head, ventnata, and that's all been done. The optimal window to do that was August, September. They've treated all of that in 9 counties. And so the part that we play is more the prevention and recovery piece. When it comes to putting things out, that's Kelly's shop. And one of the beauties of the collaborative approach that we have is that at any time, any one of us will say, stay in your lane, because I don't want to get in her lane. I'm in her way. I'm not helping. And she doesn't need to get in the funding thing because that's what we do. Same with Lynn and with all the other agencies, Game and Fish, County Weed and Pest, County Fire, County Conservation Districts. They're all at the table. But once you identify the pathway that you're going to take forward, then everybody does their job and you get it done quicker and more efficiently. The local participation is absolutely essential. If we don't have that, we can't do anything. And it's taken locals a little time to realize that we really are there to help them and not to tell them what to do. Now that once that light goes on, it's gangbusters. We can do all kinds of things. But my final thought would be that what we really, the key right now as we move forward is building resilience into our natural systems. They need to have fire in them, but not at 1 million acres a year. They need to have flood prevention. They need to have access to floodplains. All of those things that build a resilient ecosystem are preventative, and that is mitigation in the truest sense.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate it. Kelly, can you talk about the importance of appropriate recovery in looking at the effects of wildfire in the future?
Yes. So Bob hit it on very well, the importance of when we think about, so Bob said he spent 46 million in just recovery, and a lot of that is very focused on grasslands, right? There wasn't homes, there wasn't things like that burned. My total cost last year was 37 million. So that just gives you an idea what the cost was to have fire on the landscape in Wyoming between just two different suppression and then the recovery side of it for our communities. So with that, we really focus on the state forestry side on prevention in what we would acts that we can do and prevention, education, planning. How do we do exactly what Bob's kind of talking about, which is creating these resilient landscapes on the ground. So with that, we actually coordinate quite a bit with the work that we do with the USDA Forest Service. We receive 3 different types of grants, and we coordinate just like Bob's talking about at that local level with that local fire warden or fuels mitigation coordinator. Quite a bit of our counties right now are going through their community wildfire protection plans. They've received grant funding for that. That is a big deal for us. We need those in place. That's when we're working with the power companies and saying, these are our critical areas and our priority areas that we need to be actually turning around and then funding true mitigation projects on the ground for our communities. And we've done quite a bit of that. But right now, a lot of that money is coming directly from our grant applications. And in Wyoming, we have to compete with places like California, like the Front Range of Denver. And so we are about 50% in getting those grants. The majority of them are through planning, but they're absolutely critical. And that's a conversation we're going to have as a group is, what do we need to do more of? Where do we find different partners to come in and help us find additional funding and additional capacity? Because the work is overwhelming. If you start thinking about how much needs to get done on the ground, we have increased our workload through President Trump's executive order, timber executive order. Wyoming has also done an executive order for timber, increasing active forest management on the ground across all boundaries, all landscapes. So again, this is talking about how do we get these landscapes to a place that they can handle wildfire in a way that isn't just burning over these forests and not having trees grow back in our lifetime anymore. So hopefully that answers your question.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's all a big circle, isn't it?
It is all a big circle.
Hey, Dustin, so Black Hills is also a great partner when it comes to mitigation. Can you talk about the work your company's doing in that area?
Yeah, I'll say wildfire prevention efforts are not new to us. We've been operating in Cheyenne since the late 1800s, as well as the Black Hills of South Dakota and down into central Colorado. So wildfire is not new to us, but a lot of the things that we're doing, I would call foundational to kind of what utilities should be doing. And they're not very sexy. Things like tree trimming and inspecting our assets, testing pole strengths, those kinds of things on a regular basis is step one, understanding the condition of our system and performing the required maintenance. Step number two for us is targeted investments in the system, replacing portions where we have the highest risk, where we've got the most age, where we've got the most challenges. So targeted investments in new equipment, new technologies. And then the final one, which is a little bit newer to us, and I mentioned it earlier, is really more of our operational response. There wasn't a time 10 years ago where we were watching the weather on a daily basis to see what the fire conditions were. But now every day we start our day off with a fire weather review to see what are the conditions out there and what is the risk associated with a potential ignition. And that drives our response. So we adjust the configuration of our electrical system on those kinds of days. We adjust our crew's activity on those kinds of days. And on the most critical of days, we'll implement our public safety power shutoff. So I'll say in the Forum app is a link to our comprehensive wildfire mitigation plan, which talks more about how we identify risk and the steps we take to reduce that risk. It's also out on our website. You can go out and find it. We're working on an update and expect to have that published in the next month or so.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody have any questions for our panel today? Go ahead.
Question. So in states, and I'm not sure how your states are set up, but in our state in Arizona, challenges that we have with mitigation are there are multiple jurisdictions, whether it be National Forest Service or working with BLM or whatever. So you might be able to do mitigation among state lands, but that are owned, but it gets to be a challenge. Could you just kind of talk a little bit around that and how you work with it? And do you come up with a comprehensive plan to say, hey guys, can you find funding to do this? Because it's the most, and we suffered a lot in the Grand Canyon fire that we had. There was as a National Forest Service. Yeah. So we knew it needed to be mitigated, and then had no work had really been done in that area. So if you can talk to that, I'm sure we all would appreciate it.
Absolutely. So what we hear you loud and clear. And in Wyoming, we recognize that we are that connector. It takes the state agency to connect those federal agencies who do not talk to each other, by the way. They don't plan together. The Bureau of Land Management and the USDA Forest Service, National Park Service, they're not actually planning and working together. If we're going to get them to work together, it's because we're bringing them into a meeting and we're saying we're going to work together. One of the newest abilities that we've really stepped into as a state is the Good Neighbor Authority. And that is an authority that allows the state agencies to contract, and counties and tribes to contract on and do work on federal lands. So your state agency can do these cross-boundary projects on our contracts. under state contracts. And so we do, our largest cross-boundary project is just was sold in the Medicine Bow, and it is timber on Forest Service, BLM, state, and private lands all within the same area. And it'll all go under state contracting. And so we go through the Good Neighbor Authority agreements. We have a master agreement, both with the BLM and with the Forest Service. And we bring that to the table. And we have these agreements with we have 8 national forests in Wyoming, and 6 of them carry that. 7th is, we have a minor one with Uinta-Wasatch Cache. And so that's where we're getting a lot of our work done. Our Wyoming legislature wants us to really step into that too. There's a broader conversation. As these federal agencies start to have massive reductions, some of those reductions are in some really special expertise with on the ground work. And that's, again, when your state agency can step in. Our contracting systems are much more flexible. What we have done too is we've gone then and said, okay, if we're going to take this part on conservation districts, can you take on the private lands that we've been doing a lot of this layout on? And so we have a lot of conservation districts doing fuels mitigation work on the ground in coordination with the state forestry and with Wyoming Game and Fish. So Wyoming Game and Fish, who is our other state agency, also carries Good Neighbor Authority agreements. They're looking at work when you're talking about aquatics and how to make these landscapes more resilient. They're also doing those same type of contracts on the ground for beaver dam analogs, aspen enhancement work. And then lastly, our Wyoming Department of Agriculture is also helping to get planning moving faster when we're worried about invasive species. Some of our forest plans don't have the ability to spray with helicopters, so we have to do the NEPA work. And again, your projects aren't probably getting done because the NEPA wasn't done, I'm assuming, on those forests. And how do we as state agencies step in and say, we're going to take care of that for you so we can get this done quicker, because this is a priority for our communities. Hopefully that answers some of your questions. So, want to add to that, Bob?
Yeah, I do. Money really talks. And when you step up to the table and say, we're putting in $49.5 million, your share of that is X, it's pretty hard for them to walk away. The beauty is that we're blind to land ownership. And so a lot of times, like Kelly said, as long as the NEPA's done, if they're yammering around about they can't find money, we just go do it. And that you can't leave a seed source like cheatgrass in the middle of a BLM section. You're killing yourself. So we just do it. And I think the other thing that Kelly touched on that's critical is we try to push all of these projects as local as possible.
Yep.
20 years ago when we started the trust, we would get applications from BLM offices, from Forest Service districts, ranger districts and things. They're a nightmare to deal with. If you've ever dealt with their contracting people, it's absolutely ridiculous. So we just said, why don't you work with the conservation district and they'll handle the money part. We get them paid faster. They get the money out. And so they've really become a pivotal piece in what we do. More recently, that's become weed and pest districts, but some of them don't have the capacity. So in Johnson County, in the north central part of the state, the conservation district said, we'll handle the bookkeeping, you handle the weeds, the invasive piece, and county fire is going to handle this piece, and it all gets billed through the district and then gets sent back out. So it's multiple entities, again, staying in their lanes and doing what they do best. But the more you can drive it locally, you got to remember that the district ranger drinks in the same bar with the conservation district guy, and there's immense pressure you can apply locally that doesn't exist in Denver or in Salt Lake or in Phoenix. You want that to be a value that community wants to uphold, and it makes a lot of difference. So the more local you can get it, the better.
I think it's fairly clear, but can you talk about why you're worried about cheatgrass and mitinata and all of those things? I mean, just the relationship there.
Well, just go.
The scale of that too.
Just take a plane out there and pour gasoline on the landscape, because it's the same thing. It is so volatile and it's so prolific that if you don't find a way to treat it and you don't continue, you're basically creating a bomb. And some of you in the Great Basin states know what's happened out there. If you go look at some parts of southern Oregon, Nevada, eastern and southern Utah, it becomes a monoculture. And one of my friends from Nevada said, you know, we thought, oh, well, we can graze that stuff in the spring and it'll green up again in the fall. It isn't that bad. The first fire came through, and this is in an area where the fire frequency should probably be what, 20 to 30, Kelly? 20 to 30 years. All of a sudden, your fire frequency is 2 to 3. And then the second fire came through, and now there's nothing but cheatgrass. And you think, oh, well, it still has some redeeming value. The third fire came through, it's bare ground. It's mineral soil, nothing grows. And you look at that from an economic perspective, how much that takes out of the state. We lose about $38 million a year in economic productivity to cheatgrass alone. That's in the agricultural side. The ecological side, it may even be a greater amount because you've now created monocultures where you lose habitat for multiple species. Sagebrush being an example, 72 species in this state are sagebrush obligats. You lose that component of your landscape, you have affected 72 iconic species in the West. Things like mule deer, sage grouse, cotton-tailed rabbits. It's a massive undertaking because the risk is absolutely huge if we don't do something.
Thank you. Great question. Anybody else have a question? You have a question? Go ahead.
You're the experts more than me in what you do. And I was listening earlier, on flooding, which is our hazard. And we were talking about co-beneficiaries, which I think is the moral of the story today. When you're talking about make it important to your community and make them involved in the process. But bureaucracy gets in the way a lot. And it seems like, the less people you have, maybe the more effective you are sometimes. So how do you navigate that in a way that, can be effective in higher populated states?
We have one advantage to being a small populated state. Yeah. So go ahead.
Yeah, it's a great question. And looking back in my career, when we started out, the bureaucratic quagmires you get into, primarily because of turf and ego, just stopped you in your tracks. And a bunch of us finally just said that we're tired of this. We can't do this anymore. So we do a lot of collaborative process in the state. We've done it on forest health. We've done it on migration, wildlife migration routes, on wildfire, on sage grouse, on bighorn sheep. You put people at the table and all you ask is that they can make a decision for their agency. And that's very clear. Sometimes you have to write a federal charter to get it done. Usually you don't. But when they come to the table and you start with very simple goals. In the case of sage grouse, which I chair, we have two goals. One is to keep the bird viable and on the landscape, which we're doing. The other is to maintain our economy, which is we're doing. You don't have these grandiose 40-page manifestos. You have two goals that you all can tie back to, and it's really effective. Then each of the entities that sits at the table is taking information back, or should be. They don't always, but if Kelly's there, Kelly is the link back to forestry and to county fire. If Lynn is there, that's the link to FEMA, to local emergency managers. And it works like a charm. And after we've been doing it about 30 years, we do it with almost everything now. And people know that's the system they know and understand. But you do, and you start with the facts. That's the last thing I'll say. We start with the science, we start with the facts, and they speak for themselves. So as we were talking last night, you're looking at basically you've created a risk that's unbelievable on the Mississippi River. How do you deal with that? You got to start with the science, the ecology, and the facts. And then from there, it leads in a lot of directions. Some of them you can't do, some of them you can.
And I can add to that too, having simple missions. It's all about your mission. And in Wyoming, we get things done because of relationships. You build the relationships first so you can make the hard decisions that you have to make. And we've had fires where we've had to say, we're going to have to let your community here, we have two massive fires over here in this county going, but because we're evacuating a subdivision here, you don't get any aviation, only this fire gets aviation because that's all we have right now. or we're going to have to let that fire come all the way in. It's possibly going to burn community, but we have to save that one water source because it's going to be the water source for the entire community and the entire county almost. So those are like very difficult decisions, but in order to make those decisions, you really have to take the time. And that's what those collaboratives really drive, is building those relationships. So when it is time to make those hard decisions, you're making them with the right mission in mind, and everybody understands that too.
It works the same way when working with our private sector
I
partners
definitely
as
feel
well.
like, yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
I agree.
Okay. Any other questions? Great. Thank you guys. And thank you guys so much for being here today and giving us some great information.